On a crisp autumn evening in Washington, D.C., fate brought together two prominent figures at an upscale charity gala held in one of the city's historic hotels. The event, organized to raise funds for underprivileged youth education programs, was bustling with influential guests from various spheres of American society. Among them was Emily Jensen, a well-known television host famed for her liberal viewpoints and incisive interviews on her nationally televised talk show. Emily arrived in a tailored, tasteful dress and carried an air of determined optimism. Her reputation for articulating progressive ideas and giving voice to the marginalized preceded her, and tonight, as she mingled among political insiders and philanthropists, she couldn't shake a subtle premonition that this evening might spark something unexpected. Across the elegantly decorated lobby, Barron Trump made his entrance. Despite his relatively young age, his presence evoked the legacy of his famous family. Dressed in a sharp, dark suit that underscored his status as a rising business figure, Barron carried himself with an almost imperceptible cool detachment. His demeanor and carefully measured responses in public had earned him both respect and criticism in equal measure. Many guests were surprised to see him at a charity event. After all, his public persona had been more closely associated with business ventures and political debates than with the philanthropic circles that typically graced such occasions. As the evening progressed, Emily found herself near the lobby's refreshment area where guests exchanged pleasantries over glasses of champagne. Their eyes met for the first time, a brief, charged moment where both sensed the underlying tension between their worldviews. With her characteristic warmth, Emily extended a hand and introduced herself. "Good evening, I'm Emily Jensen. It's a pleasure to meet you." Barron offered a curt nod and a brief, formal greeting, stating his name in return. In that fleeting instant, an unspoken awareness passed between them, a mutual recognition that this encounter was more than mere courtesy, and that their eventual paths might collide in ways that would challenge their firmly held convictions. While the gala's sophisticated ambience, accented by soft classical music and the gentle glow of chandeliers, temporarily eased any initial discomfort, the conversation between the two soon turned to matters of substance. As they discussed the goals of the charity event, Emily's passion for social justice emerged clearly. She questioned the practical impact of wealth on education reform, emphasizing that real change required confronting societal inequities head-on. In contrast, Barron, with his business acumen firmly in tow, argued that economic stability was the cornerstone of any effective social program. Without a solid financial foundation, he remarked in a measured tone, we cannot sustainably support initiatives like these. His answer, although polite, carried an undercurrent of reservation, hinting at his deeply ingrained belief in market-driven solutions rather than government intervention or charity alone. The dialogue, though brief, was enough to signal to both parties, and to several onlookers, that this was not a casual exchange. In hushed side conversations, influential guests noted the palpable divergence between Emily's idealistic perspective and Barron's pragmatic approach. Those with an eye for detail recognized that this encounter might foreshadow a broader ideological conflict that resonated far beyond the walls of that hotel. Even as the evening's formal program continued, the memory of that first charged interaction lingered in the air, becoming a subtle undercurrent in every conversation that night. Over the course of the evening, as guests moved from one conversation to another, Emily found herself reflecting on the encounter. She had built her career on engaging in spirited debates and challenging the status quo. The meeting with Barron, however, felt like a spark, a catalyst that could ignite a larger discussion about the intersections of business, politics, and social responsibility in America. Meanwhile, Barron appeared to retreat into a more reserved shell as the night advanced. Though he participated in polite exchanges with others, his brief interaction with Emily left him visibly thoughtful. To him, the conversation had exposed a fundamental clash. While he believed that robust economic growth was the path to societal betterment, Emily's focus on individual human experiences and the importance of social equity challenged the very foundation of his worldview. Throughout that evening, the venue buzzed not only with the sounds of clinking glasses and soft music, but also with an undercurrent of anticipation. Observers, many of whom were influential in their own right, sensed that the meeting between Emily Jensen and Barron Trump was more than chance. It was a portent of a conflict that would soon capture national attention. As the gala drew to a close and guests began to depart, both Emily and Barron left with a heightened awareness of their differences. In the quiet moments after the event, as they each walked away into the cool Washington night, it was clear that this initial encounter had set in motion a series of events that would soon embroil the nation in a debate over competing visions for America's future. Only a few days after that fateful evening, Emily Jensen decided to address the simmering ideological tension head-on by dedicating a special episode of her highly rated talk show to a discussion of social and economic policy. The show, broadcast live to millions of American households, was poised to become the forum where opposing worldviews would be laid bare. In a bold move that surprised many of her regular viewers, Emily extended an invitation to none other than Barron Trump, a decision that instantly became the talk of the town. Many speculated whether this was a genuine attempt to bridge the ideological gap or merely a calculated tactic to boost ratings. The studio was abuzz with activity on the day of the broadcast. State-of-the-art cameras, strategically placed lighting, and a meticulously arranged set all contributed to an atmosphere of professionalism and intensity. Emily opened the show by warmly welcoming her audience and outlining the evening's theme, finding common ground in a divided America. As the camera panned to the waiting guest chair, viewers across the nation saw Barron enter the studio with a measured grace that belied the controversy his presence was sure to generate. His crisp suit and calm demeanor reinforced the image of a serious business mind, one that preferred facts and figures over emotional rhetoric. The discussion began with a segment on corporate responsibility and the role of private enterprise in funding social initiatives. Emily posed a pointed question about the intersection of profit motives and genuine social concern, asking, "How can we ensure that the support offered by large corporations isn't merely a facade for self-interest, but actually benefits the community?" Barron responded by emphasizing the necessity of a strong economic foundation for any sustainable social program. He elaborated on the importance of investments, tax incentives, and strategic partnerships between the private and public sectors. Although his tone was calm and measured, there was an unmistakable undercurrent of defensiveness in his delivery, a subtle hint that he was uncomfortable with the probing nature of the question. As the conversation unfolded, it became increasingly clear that Emily's line of inquiry was designed to challenge the very assumptions underpinning Barron's worldview. She interjected with questions about accountability, citing recent examples where corporate sponsorships had been criticized for masking ulterior motives. "How do we separate genuine corporate philanthropy from a calculated effort to polish a company's image?" she pressed, her voice resonating with the passion of someone deeply committed to social justice. Barron's reply, while articulate, skirted the direct issue by reiterating the indispensable role of business in driving progress. "Economic stability is the bedrock of everything we do," he asserted, a statement that seemed to encapsulate his entire philosophy. The tension in the studio became almost palpable as each subsequent question by Emily was met with an answer that increasingly leaned on abstract economic principles rather than addressing the human stories behind the statistics. The live broadcast soon evolved into a battleground of ideas. Emily's questions grew sharper and more pointed, drawing on personal anecdotes and real-life examples of communities that had suffered from corporate neglect. In contrast, Barron's responses were laden with technical jargon and references to market trends that, while impressive to some, only served to widen the gap between their perspectives. The camera captured every subtle shift in Barron's expression, a fleeting flash of irritation here, a moment of hesitation there, which did not go unnoticed by the studio audience and millions watching at home. Behind the scenes, the production team worked frantically to keep the discussion within the allotted time, aware that each minute added to the national drama unfolding on screen. As the show entered its later segments, a live studio analyst was brought in to provide context with polling data and economic statistics. This intervention, intended to introduce objectivity into an increasingly heated debate, instead served to further polarize the discussion. Emily passionately argued that numbers alone could not capture the human cost of economic policies that favor the wealthy, while Barron maintained that quantitative data was the most reliable metric for assessing progress. The contrast between their approaches was stark, and it was clear that neither was willing to concede any ground. By the end of the broadcast, the atmosphere in the studio was charged with a mix of unresolved tension and a sense that something larger was at stake. Emily's closing remarks called for a re-examination of priorities in American society, a plea for compassion over cold calculation, while Barron's final words underscored the belief that only through solid economic growth could the nation achieve lasting prosperity. As the cameras went dark and the credits rolled, the impact of that live debate reverberated far beyond the confines of the studio. Within hours, social media platforms were flooded with reactions, hashtags trended nationwide, news outlets scrambled to analyze every exchanged remark, and opinion columns emerged debating which side had presented a more convincing case. The broadcast had not only solidified the public image of the two figures, but had also ignited a spark that would fuel further debates in town halls, university lecture halls, and even informal dinner conversations across the country. In retrospect, it was clear that the program had transcended its original format, evolving into a national dialogue about the future direction of American society. Emily's willingness to confront controversial issues head-on and Barron's measured, if sometimes evasive defense of his views had set the stage for a conflict that was destined to leave an indelible mark on the national conversation. In the wake of the explosive live broadcast, the ideological clash between Emily Jensen and Barron Trump quickly escalated from a television debate to a full-blown national controversy. Within just a day of the show, major news networks across the country were ablaze with headlines such as Emily versus Barron, the debate that divided a nation and clash of ideologies, how two figures sparked a national conversation. Every contentious remark from the broadcast was scrutinized by pundits and analysts, transforming what had begun as a scheduled program into an ongoing public spectacle. Social media platforms lit up with threads dissecting every nuance of the debate, as millions of Americans weighed in on what they perceived as a fundamental clash between progressive values and conservative economic principles. As the fallout from the broadcast intensified, the debate spilled over into various public arenas. Prominent talk shows, political podcasts, and cable news programs invited both supporters and detractors of each figure to weigh in on the controversy. Barron, determined to salvage his reputation and articulate his perspective, made several high-profile appearances on other media outlets. His interviews, often characterized by a calm yet increasingly defensive tone, were aimed at reasserting his belief that sound economic policy was essential for national stability. Critics, however, argued that his reluctance to engage directly with the more personal critiques raised by Emily only served to reinforce the perception that he was out of touch with the real-life implications of economic decisions. The growing media frenzy soon prompted a series of public demonstrations in major cities. In New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and beyond, protesters gathered in public squares, holding signs with slogans such as "People before profits" and "Economic growth must serve everyone." These rallies, though initially peaceful, sometimes escalated into heated confrontations between groups of opposing ideologies. Observers noted that the demonstrations were not simply about the television debate, but had become emblematic of deeper divisions within American society. For many, the conflict between Emily and Barron was seen as a microcosm of the broader struggle between a more compassionate, community-focused vision of America and a model that prioritized financial success and market efficiency above all else. In response to the growing public unrest, several bipartisan groups and civic organizations attempted to stage mediation sessions between the two camps. A series of closed-door meetings were arranged by influential community leaders and business executives, with the aim of diffusing the mounting tension. At one such meeting held at a prominent community center in downtown Washington, representatives from both sides of the debate tried to establish common ground by discussing potential compromises on issues such as corporate accountability and social welfare programs. However, these efforts largely faltered as the underlying ideological chasm proved too wide to bridge. Emily's unwavering commitment to advocating for the underprivileged clashed head-on with Barron's steadfast insistence that only a robust, market-driven economy could provide the necessary resources for societal progress. The session ended without any significant breakthroughs, leaving both sides more entrenched in their positions than ever before. At the same time, academic circles and think tanks began publishing extensive analyses of the debate's impact on public opinion and policy. Studies appeared in respected journals, revealing that the polarization evident in the media coverage was reflected in public attitudes. Surveys conducted in the weeks following the broadcast indicated a growing divide among voters. Many young, urban residents rallied behind Emily's calls for reform, while older and more conservative demographics expressed strong support for Barron's economic arguments. These findings were not only reported in scholarly articles but also widely circulated in mainstream media, further fueling the perception that the debate was a symptom of an America split in two. Meanwhile, as the national discourse grew more acrimonious, both Emily and Barron found themselves subject to intense personal scrutiny. Emily was hailed by some as a fearless advocate for social justice, yet critics accused her of exploiting the debate to score political points. Barron, on the other hand, was simultaneously lauded by conservative commentators for his principled defense of free market ideals and castigated by progressives for what they saw as an overly sanitized, detached approach to issues of human suffering. Every public appearance, every interview, and every written statement was analyzed in exhaustive detail, with media pundits questioning the motivations and convictions of both figures. Ultimately, the escalation of the conflict transcended the realm of television and entered the broader political landscape. Lawmakers from both sides began using the debate as a talking point in congressional hearings and legislative debates, arguing that the clash between personal values and economic imperatives was at the heart of many contemporary policy disputes. Several senators and representatives called for the formation of a bipartisan commission to investigate the broader social impact of corporate practices and to propose reforms aimed at reducing economic inequality. Despite these high-minded proposals, the reality was that the controversy had reached a fever pitch, a reflection of an America in which every public dispute quickly became a proxy battle over the nation's future direction. In the midst of this growing storm, it became clear that the confrontation between Emily Jensen and Barron Trump was no longer a singular event but a catalyst for an ongoing national debate. With every news cycle, every televised panel discussion, and every social media post, the conflict deepened, highlighting the profound and often painful differences in how Americans envisioned their country. What had started as a live broadcast had morphed into a sustained struggle, one that illuminated the fault lines of a society wrestling with the challenges of economic change, political polarization, and the search for a unifying narrative. Within weeks of the initial broadcast and the subsequent escalation of tensions, the clash between Emily Jensen and Barron Trump had taken on a life of its own. The controversy, once confined to the studios and cable networks, had exploded into a national phenomenon that touched every corner of American society. Major news outlets, from the New York Times to local television stations across the Midwest, were inundated with analyses, op-eds, and special reports dissecting the debate and its broader implications. Headlines such as "Dividing Lines in America" and "A Battle for the Nation's Soul" adorned the front pages, each story adding new layers of interpretation to the unfolding drama. Political leaders from both parties quickly weighed in on the matter. Prominent Democrats praised Emily for her courage in confronting issues of social injustice and inequality, arguing that her passionate rhetoric was a necessary counterbalance to the often impersonal logic of corporate economics. Conversely, leading Republicans and conservative pundits defended Barron's approach, contending that a thriving free market system was the only viable path to long-term national prosperity. In many congressional hearings and public forums, speeches referenced the debate as a microcosm of the larger ideological divide that was threatening to fracture the country. Social media became a virtual battleground where millions of Americans expressed their support, indignation, and frustration. Twitter threads, Facebook posts, and Instagram stories were filled with clips from the debate, accompanied by passionate hashtags like #PeopleBeforeProfit and #EconomicRealism. Viral videos captured moments of heightened tension from a live broadcast, and these snippets were endlessly re-edited and shared by users on platforms like TikTok, sparking impromptu online rallies and live-stream discussions. In cafes, college dorms, and suburban living rooms across the nation, everyday citizens found themselves drawn into a dialogue that transcended traditional political boundaries. The conversation was no longer limited to political insiders. It had become a grassroots movement that mirrored the diversity and dynamism of modern America. Amid this fervor, a series of nationally televised town halls and roundtable discussions were organized in major cities such as New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. These events, often moderated by respected journalists and community leaders, sought to provide a platform for voices from all sides of the debate. Participants ranged from small business owners and union leaders to university professors and social activists, each offering their perspective on how to reconcile the competing demands of economic growth and social justice. The public meetings were not without their controversies. In some cases, passionate exchanges erupted into heated debates that required intervention by local authorities. Yet, even in the midst of discord, there emerged a common theme, a collective recognition that America was at a crossroads, and that the solutions to its problems would require honest dialogue and perhaps painful compromises. International observers also took notice of the American conflict. Major global news networks and foreign newspapers reported extensively on the debate, often drawing parallels to similar ideological battles in Europe and Asia. Analysts from around the world commented that the confrontation between Emily and Barron was not just an isolated incident but a reflection of a global trend where traditional political and economic models were being questioned. Their assessments underscored that the United States, long seen as a beacon of democratic values and free market principles, was now grappling with internal divisions that could have profound implications for its role on the world stage. Despite the overwhelming national attention and the diversity of opinions, there was a growing undercurrent of concern among community leaders and policymakers. As public discourse became increasingly polarized, many worried that the intense focus on individual figures was distracting from systemic issues that required coordinated action. Calls for increased civic engagement and efforts to rebuild trust in public institutions began to emerge. Community organizations and nonprofits launched initiatives aimed at bridging the gap between different demographic groups, hosting workshops, and organizing dialogue sessions designed to foster mutual understanding and address local concerns head-on. In Washington, D.C., the debate reached the halls of power. Lawmakers from both sides started drafting proposals intended to curb the sensationalism of media coverage and to promote more constructive political discourse. Committees were formed to study the impact of media polarization on public policy, and several senators publicly stated that the country's future depended on restoring a sense of unity and common purpose. The clash between Emily Jensen and Barron Trump had, in effect, catalyzed a nationwide introspection, forcing a reckoning over how to balance free expression with social responsibility and how to transform divisive rhetoric into meaningful change. As the controversy continued to resonate, cultural institutions also joined the conversation. Renowned artists, musicians, and writers organized exhibitions, concerts, and public readings that celebrated diversity and called for empathy across ideological divides. These cultural events, supported by both private donors and government grants, underscored a broader movement toward reconciliation. In galleries and concert halls from Seattle to Miami, audiences were invited to reflect on the values that define their communities and to envision an America where economic success and social progress were mutually reinforcing rather than mutually exclusive. In sum, the national resonance of the debate was undeniable. What began as a televised exchange between two polar opposites had evolved into a multifaceted phenomenon that permeated every aspect of American public life. From the highest echelons of government to the smallest community centers, the conversation sparked by Emily and Barron ignited hope, fear, and an urgent desire for change. The debate had become a symbol of the challenges facing modern America, a challenge that required not only policy reforms but also a renewed commitment to dialogue, understanding, and ultimately unity. Months after the initial spark of controversy had dimmed, the lasting impact of the confrontation between Emily Jensen and Barron Trump continued to shape American society in profound ways. The public spectacle, which began with a heated television debate and escalated into a nationwide dialogue, left its mark on the careers of both participants and on the broader political and cultural landscape of the country. As the dust slowly settled, citizens, commentators, and policymakers alike began to assess the long-term consequences of the conflict, drawing lessons that would inform the future of public discourse in an era marked by deep polarization. For Emily Jensen, the aftermath of the debate was both a personal and professional turning point. Once renowned for her uncompromising advocacy for social justice, she found herself re-examining her approach to broadcasting. Determined to move beyond the flames of controversy, Emily revamped her show's format to include a broader range of voices and perspectives. In subsequent seasons, she invited guests from across the political spectrum, community organizers, business leaders, policy experts, and even critics, to engage in open and respectful dialogue. "Our nation thrives when we listen to each other," she explained in several interviews, acknowledging that the conflict had forced her to confront the limitations of a one-sided narrative. Her willingness to adapt was met with cautious optimism from her loyal viewers, and ratings eventually stabilized as audiences recognized that her evolved approach was a sincere effort to build bridges rather than deepen divides. Barron Trump, on the other hand, experienced a transformation of his own. The public scrutiny he faced during and after the debate compelled him to reassess the principles that had guided his public persona. While initially defensive and reserved, Barron gradually began to incorporate a more human element into his public appearances. In a series of interviews, he spoke candidly about the challenges of balancing the demands of a high-profile business career with the responsibilities of public service. He began to participate actively in community outreach programs and took on the role of a spokesperson for several initiatives aimed at fostering economic empowerment in underserved communities. His evolution was not without controversy. Detractors accused him of capitulating to political correctness, while supporters hailed his willingness to grow and engage with a broader range of issues. Ultimately, Barron's journey became a case study in the complexities of modern leadership, illustrating that even those rooted in the world of finance and corporate strategy could evolve in response to the changing expectations of an increasingly connected society. The broader political landscape also felt the reverberations of the clash. Lawmakers and civic leaders, having witnessed the polarizing effects of sensational media coverage, began to advocate for reforms aimed at reducing the divisiveness of public debate. In Congress, several bipartisan initiatives were introduced with the goal of fostering more constructive dialogue between political adversaries. These proposals included measures to promote transparency in media funding, guidelines for responsible public communication, and the creation of civic education programs designed to encourage critical thinking and empathy among young Americans. While not all of these proposals found immediate success, they sparked a renewed interest in the importance of civility and mutual respect, a vital lesson gleaned from a high-profile conflict. Academic institutions and think tanks contributed to this introspection by organizing conferences and publishing studies that examined the interplay between media, public opinion, and political polarization. Scholars from prestigious universities argued that the debate between Emily and Barron was symptomatic of a broader crisis of representation, a crisis that demanded new frameworks for understanding how media narratives shape public consciousness. These academic discussions resonated beyond the ivory towers, influencing policy debates and inspiring grassroots movements that called for a more inclusive and thoughtful approach to public discourse. Many activists and community leaders, motivated by these insights, launched local initiatives to bridge ideological divides. Town hall meetings, community forums, and cross-cultural workshops sprang up in neighborhoods across the country, each endeavor aimed at healing the fractures that had widened during the period of intense media scrutiny. Yet, amid these constructive developments, the conflict also left its share of scars. In several American cities, episodes of street protests and sporadic clashes between rival groups served as stark reminders of the underlying tensions that still simmered beneath the surface. Law enforcement agencies reported an uptick in incidents related to politically charged violence, prompting local officials to implement measures designed to maintain public safety and promote peaceful dialogue. The legacy of the debate was thus double-edged. It spurred efforts toward unity and reform on one hand while simultaneously exposing the vulnerabilities of a society still grappling with deep-seated mistrust and ideological rigidity. In the reflective months that followed, both Emily Jensen and Barron Trump spoke publicly about the lessons they had learned from the ordeal. In separate interviews, they acknowledged that the controversy had not only tested their professional resolve, but had also provided valuable insights into the complexities of modern American life. Emily emphasized that real progress required more than rhetoric. It required listening, learning, and a willingness to find common ground, even when differences seemed insurmountable. Barron, echoing similar sentiments, remarked that the experience had taught him the importance of humility and openness in a world where every public statement carried the potential to influence millions of lives. Ultimately, the aftermath of their confrontation became a powerful catalyst for change, a reminder that the evolution of public discourse depended on the willingness of individuals to adapt, empathize, and embrace the challenges of a diverse society. The legacy of the debate between Emily Jensen and Barron Trump endures as a testament to the fact that, in America, even the most contentious conflicts can eventually give rise to opportunities for reconciliation and growth. The lessons learned from that turbulent period continue to shape how communities, media, and policymakers approach the delicate balance between passionate advocacy and respectful dialogue, forging a path toward a future where differences can coexist in the pursuit of a common good.